All right, well, we are going to get started. Thank you all so much for being here. I think I've had a chance to meet everybody, but if I haven't met you yet, my name's Jonathan Ingram, and it's my honor to be the Executive Director of Faith Co-op. And Faith Co-op is a nonprofit here in Chattanooga, and our mission is to awaken Christians to how their faith brings daily purpose. And we focus mainly on what most of you do, those 40 to 60 hours a week between the Sundays in your life. Go to a job. We believe that God cares not only about the time that you spend with Him in your quiet time or in the small group or when you go to church, but that all of your life is something that is part of something He cares about and is redeeming to Himself. And we want to provide spaces for Christians in our community here in Chattanooga to wrestle with what it means to follow Jesus in all of their life, and specifically their jobs. And so at Faith Co-op, we do a lot of different things. If you're not familiar with us, we have 2 9-month fellowships for people to engage with. We have a program for adults called the Main and Market Fellows. There's info about that on the table when you walked in. If you want to learn more, we have some alumni of that program also in the room. So this is a program for folks that are already established in their career, that want to do a deep dive in what the gospel means for their life, for our city, and for the work that they've been called to do. We also have a program for recent college graduates called the Chattanooga Fellows Program, with a current person and some alumni of that program also in the room, where we help folks as they begin their career right after college, what it means to follow Jesus as a recent college graduate, as they start their job, as they get plugged into a community and do those things. We have a class that we teach called Faith and Work 101 that churches will hire us to come in, and we'll come in and do a basic theology of what the Bible says about your work, your 9-to-5 work. And so if you have a church that might be interested in something like that, we'd love to partner with you on that. We have a podcast called the Weekday Saints Podcast, where we highlight good work happening in our city that oftentimes goes unseen. So your barber down the road, an auto mechanic, about what it means to honor God in those types of work, that God cares about that, for that to be seen. And another thing we do is what you're at today, our Lunch and Learn series. And we do 6 of these events a year where we theme them out, and we talk about different things about what it means for us to engage with God in our work. And we try to bring in some amazing, wise panelists to help us do that. And currently we're in the middle of a series called Trusting God in the Workplace. In our faith, oftentimes we throw phrases around and we just say them out loud. So I'll be praying for you, or just go trust God. But oftentimes we go, what does that actually look like on a regular basis? What does it look like in our actual life to trust God with the things He's put before us? And so we've been going through a series. We've looked at trusting God when starting a business, trusting God when things feel out of your control, trusting God when you're resting, when you're not working. And today we're going to talk about something that I think is a really important topic for us to consider, and that's trusting God when things don't go well, when failure occurs. And you can imagine how fun it is to invite someone to be a panelist to talk about failure. It's such an honor. Some of you even emailed me to say, well, I was coming to this event. But the reality is, this idea of failure, of things not working out, is not an uncommon thing. It's actually part of life. And we believe that our faith has space for that to happen. And so I hope today's conversation, as we dive into this, can be something for you as our amazing panelists, Jonathan and Chris, share a little bit about their own experiences and their stories and what God's doing in their life. That can be a gift to you where God has you. And for you, it might not feel like a big failure, but for some of you, it might. You might be in a season where that's the case. And we hope that this can be something to invite you in with other believers to wrestle about what it might look like to trust God in these times of your life. So thankful that you're here and that you're with us. And if it's okay, we're going to jump right in. Sound good? Well, help me welcome Jonathan, Bragdon, and Chris. Say your last name one more time. Loizeaux. Yep. I was going to mess it up. So. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here with us and being willing to talk for a few minutes about your own story. But so start by telling us a little bit about yourself. How did you guys end up in Chattanooga? And you all are very plugged into the business ecosystem here in town. What do you love about Chattanooga and the businesses and the startup culture here in our city? So who you are, where you're from, what you love about our city.
All right. My name is Chris. So I was born here, and then I guess at 5, somewhere around there, we ended up moving across the country up to Washington, ended up down in California, back down to Florida, where my dad got his PhD, and then back up kind of at the end of high school. I had done dual enrollment, so at the end of high school, I didn't really have college plans because I had already done a lot of my associates side of thing, and so followed my parents up and kind of started looking around, going, what am I gonna do? And fortunately, my little sister and my now wife's little sister were best friends and put us together, and I was like, I think I'll stay around here. So, yeah, and then my parents, we actually moved up for, they were starting a company, and so I kind of was raised around kind of seeing my mom be an entrepreneur, and then my dad come in and support her and her dream and ideas and stuff like that. So that was really neat.
Got you plugged into this.
Yeah, and it made entrepreneurship and doing your own thing a lot easier in my mind. It kind of removed the, oh, okay, anyone can do it. So
that's cool. How about you, John?
It's funny, I didn't know that. I was born here too and moved away at like 6, and then came back I went to Covenant and dual degree of Georgia Tech, lived in Atlanta for a while, came back here for a gig, and when I was here, this is around the .com era. There was a company here that raised $30-something million and then imploded because they didn't raise any more money. But I wasn't in that, but I was fascinated with it. And then lived in Nashville for a while, came back, and ended up getting just saw a bunch of problems I'd love to solve, and got caught up with a few people that were starting businesses and just went after it. And then I guess the ecosystem side of this, it caught in not just that company at the .com side, which there's a great backstory there because a lot of the talent in Chattanooga can go back through this, like this sort of, this path back to some people that stayed and then started other companies and then other people came in. So that's awesome. Around 2008 or 9, I got pulled into a thing called Create Here. And we were trying to bring artists into Chattanooga, and then we're like, hey, they should be learning how to actually make that more than a hobby, make it a business. And that sort of launched, I wasn't the launcher, but I was involved in this, kind of on the board. But like that started Company Lab and Co-Starters and like all of that stuff kind of launched out of that with a bunch of really smart people. That got me really enthusiastic about the ecosystem then. And then since then, I've been involved with a lot of founders and a lot of companies. And,
yeah, you guys have both been around and starting things and doing things here in our city for a while. What do you love about entrepreneurism? What do you love about starting something and being on the front end of building something? What draws you to it? What's your passion in that?
I mean, for me, well, it's funny. I have a little problem with the word passion because it's like, I get excited about solving problems, but to really solve a problem, you have to stick with it. So for me, it's almost like it's like you wouldn't say if you're not passionate about it anymore, your marriage is over. Like you've got to kind of work through stuff. And I think solving problems is the same way, but the solving the problem part is what I get excited about. Because the reason startups even exist is because somebody got tired of something not working or the way somebody was doing it, or just, hey, this doesn't exist in the market, how come it's not there? And that piece of it, I think, is what drives me. I've always loved puzzles and solving stuff, so I think that's it.
Yeah, he said problem solving, and I was like, dang it, he took my answer. It's kind of I'm a designer by trade, and so the puzzle of I have this much space to tell a thing. How do I communicate these things? And so just the little problem solving, but then also a skateboarder, and so I was always building my own obstacles, and that right there comes with its own problem because you're always solving every single trick is a problem. So you're playing with physics and you're just failing way more than you're succeeding, up until hopefully you lock it into muscle memory, and then you have certain things and you can add to it. And so that has tended to be very similar to business, where like you see someone do something, you're like, how did they do that? You study it, and then you attempt it, and you're like, course correction midway through, and until you're semi-proficient to that thing, and then you move on to the next thing to add to your bag.
That's good. Well, tell everybody what you guys are currently involved in. What are some of the projects you've been working on that's taking a lot of your time right now?
So I've got an outdoor apparel brand called Terran that has kind of just been a continuous morph of my projects for the past like 25 years, watching it kind of just continue to where it's at. And so, high performance outdoor gear that can dress up and dress down well.
And I get excited about this building businesses, and my wife said I finally figured out what I can do when I grow up, which is takes care of therapy for me too. I get to work with a whole bunch of different companies. So I went over to, some people call it the dark side, and started a venture fund. And so now I can work with a whole bunch of entrepreneurs and try to help them build and solve problems. So it's a lot, but it's a blast. We've got about 20 investments so far, and starting to grow that. So that's what I'm passionate about. And I didn't even try to be a venture fund initially. I was just passionate about matching the right funding to what a company was actually building. And I got brainwashed as an early tech person that, hey, you got to go venture. Like, well, maybe. Usually not. So I just helped a bunch of founders match up with capital, and then that turned into a fund. So that's what I'm working on.
Back in the fall, we had this event I mentioned on trusting God when starting a business, and you guys could have both been panels on that event too. But I'd love to know, you guys are people of faith. Like, your faith in Christ is really important to who you are. And before we start talking about failure, I'd love to hear from you all. What does it look like for you to trust God as you take a leap into something new? As I know you're doing venture work now, but you've been on the front of starting things in the past. And Chris, I know you not only have the Terran, but you've started a fly shop and been involved in other startup business. What's it look like for you, for your faith, to be a part of trusting the Lord in those and the starting of something, even before we get to any kind of things not going well?
And for me, and it's important to point out, starting a fund is starting a company. Yeah. Like, it can fail, and you've got a lot of personal liability tied in it. There's a lot of unknowns. I think when you're building anything company-wise, there's this undercurrent of the unknown. There's always a tension of I don't know exactly how this is going to work out, and that can spin you into anxiety or trust. A lot of times you get forced into trust because things start to skid a little bit out of control, and you end up. And I think over time, I've just learned that the success of the business isn't actually really what it's about, which sounds crazy for an entrepreneur or a fund manager. It's, I think God uses all of these things to draw you. And that perspective, it's almost like you can't keep that constant perspective, or I have a hard time doing it. I just have to keep getting drawn back with tough things. And so I think that's probably the biggest influence I've had kind of walking, biggest thing that's influenced me over time has been just the realization of just how, I'm not in control. It's like the, what is that? Is it Proverbs 16:9, something, the heart of the man plans, but the Lord determines the steps. Like, it's that kind of thing. It's like the GPS map. Like, I think I want to go from here to there, but then something gets in the way, and then it reroutes you, and it reroutes you again. And you can't tell until you look back. Yeah. Like, oh, that was actually a much better way to go. Yeah. But just learning to it's just a daily thing. Like, I don't trust naturally, but this type of work sort of forces that, and that's what I like.
You want anything, Chris?
Repeat the question again.
Yeah, the question was just not before we get to failure. What does it look like for you to trust God when starting something? You've started a few things.
Yeah. I guess I've been very fortunate to have supportive family, both my wife, my parents, friends and family. So there's been good community that makes some of that easier. But then at the same time, there's also just an element of recognizing, like, at the end of the day, like, I have very little consistency at, like, long term compared to a God that just continuously shows up. So when I look backwards, I can see a linear, like, okay, that was his plan. But while I'm in the moment, I'm not going to see that. And so recognizing that I can do the best with what I've got. So if I have an idea that's burning and to get out, then I can play with it and see if there's a room for it. And recognize that I'll probably see how God had that planned, how he was going to work that into my life in hindsight. Yeah. But it's really his consistency that makes me go, okay, well, I can kind of do the best with what I have. And
when we start things, we wish we could see so far out in advance, but oftentimes, you're right, both of you mentioned the idea of to move forward, we have to look backwards on what God's done in the past. But I know, as you guys both are serial entrepreneurs, starting things, things have not always gone how you would have wanted, or was as successful as you would have wanted to be, or didn't make it. And so I don't know, we'd love for you both, if you're willing to share maybe a time where something failed, whether it was a full venture or an idea in one of your companies that didn't make it. Talk a little bit about a time where something didn't go the way it was supposed to. And maybe what were some of the initial feelings you had in the middle of that?
I've got nothing.
You've nothing?
Yeah, there's not enough time. But so there's a couple people in here that have known me for a long time, even worked in a couple businesses. There's one that was venture backed. This is back when a lot of times when you start out, you think, man, I know what I know. I've taken the business classes. I've read all the stuff. Now it's like I've seen all the YouTube videos. I've met all these people. I've been in these groups. I've got enough. I can do this. But you have no idea what you don't know, usually, because that's the blind spot. And so in this company, we raised a bunch of money, millions. I think there were only 2 venture-backed companies back then here in town. There weren't many. And so you also get added this extra pressure of the community. It's like, whoa, get on a panel, tell people about how this works and how to be a venture-backed company. So you've got this really crazy tension between, hey, I'm supposed to be this way, and this is the day-to-day bash it out contact sport that's going on. And then that company, the drama that happened was the financial, when the financial system went down and a bunch of the commercial real estate and all that stuff happened, we lost half our customers. That imploded, and we were flying right before that. It's like we're almost there. We've almost broken free. Ended up having to let go half the company, which is really brutal. And if you guys, I'm sure some of you in this room have had to do a lot of that. That just sticks with you. That feels like failure. Not just the business, but man, I've let these people down. I've let the investors down. And we ended up pulling it back into the black, but the investors they didn't have the appetite to put more in and grow, and so it just turned into this kind of business. It ended up selling at one point, but it was nothing like what we thought at that early beginning. And so that just felt like, it felt like I had not just failed, but I had become what I thought who I was nothing like where I ended up, because I was so tied into that. Everything I did was tied to that. And I think that was the hardest part. It was that you get sucked into the business as your identity, or being lifted up by everybody else. Here's a success story, and you got to live up to that, as opposed to the vocation you're called to, or the problem you're working on, whether it succeeds or fails. So it wasn't a full face plant, but there was a lot of really rough stuff that happened in there. At one point I had almost $1 million in bank debt with a judge's judgment already set. So for about 1.5 years, I had that thing sitting over my head while we were trying to work stuff out. Man, that's not success. This doesn't feel like it's supposed to. I should be skiing or something. This is ridiculous. But it looked better on the outside than it was on the inside, as it usually does. So that was pretty. There's a bunch of other face plants too, but that was a big one with a lot of people involved. And I would say, well, we can talk about some of that stuff later, what comes out of that. But it was brutal. I I got, what do you call it? What's it? Old people get to have the shingles. I got shingles when I was 40. Like, and they said it's just stress. It's just all that brutal stuff. I mean, it was awful. So anyway, it was bad.
Yeah, for stress-induced skin conditions.
Yeah, it was, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. Old people are tough, man.
So I ended up, I'd had a small apparel company that my brother and I had started, and by way of looking for an office and moving it out of the house into an office, found a really cool space that I ended up sharing with another company, and he was doing, I wanted the back half where I could just hide and design and do stuff, and he had the front like 10 feet as a little shop front, but he had a different job, so I ended up kind of tending the front and ended up accidentally starting a fly shop that over the next 4 years, I closed kind of the chapter on the apparel stuff for the fly shop kind of skyrocketing. And I found myself in a business partnership about 2 years into the fly shop that ended up, probably 6 months in, kind of my best analogy is when you step in something and you're like catching a whiff of something, but you keep on checking your shoe there and you never look on the outside edge of the sole, I'd be like, something, no, I can't see anything. I'd look at the bank account and it looks fine and stuff. I look at QuickBooks and it looks good. And then probably about a year in, I started getting significantly more wait a second, that seems not to line up, and found out that my business partner was that I had partnered with was cooking the books, had a different separate QuickBooks that was real and one that was fake, and kept on bouncing bank accounts he'd be like, we move banks again. And I'm like, that's like 5 times now. There's something. And so I got good at Excel through that experience. But in that it was kind of fortunately I had a track record with my fly shop prior to merging with him. But yeah, kind of uncovering stuff that I've had companies that I had to close, probably do more to myself, but then some companies that were just like, all right, I think that chapter's closed and nice and easy. And then some come out of left field and you're like, how did this happen? Like I went from $1,000, turned it into 2 to 4 to 8 and so on until our final year was just 10,000 shy of $1 million. And it was super exciting to have a little tiny fly shop doing that. But again, it looks really pretty on the surface, and then you're dealing with crazy stuff on the other side.
Both of you, your examples talked about things that you could have done, but a lot of it were outside factors, whether it was the market and real estate, whether it was a bad partner that affected you. What were some of if you don't mind sharing, what were some of the internal narratives that in the midst of failure that you were fighting, that you were feeling inside as this thing was coming apart? Both of you give examples of whether it's starting to realize something's going wrong, that you're going to have to close the doors, or this was not what I thought. You started hinting at that a little bit, Jonathan, talking about identity stuff, but I'd love to hear what was the things you're fighting internally that were coming up as failure was starting to rear its ugly head, and what you guys were going on. If you have anything you want to share.
Identity is the big one. You get to, my worth is tied to that thing that I'm building, instead of, hey, your worth is already taken care of. Like, that's just what you're called to do. But you don't know that. Or I didn't think about that in the middle of it. A lot of it for me was probably this pride-shame dichotomy, right? Where you're proud of what you're doing, so you get tied into that. But then when it doesn't work out, your pride takes this massive hit and you just start to spiral. And then it's shame. Other people are talking about this. I'm sure they're saying things that I can't even hear, and it's pretty awful. I'll never be able to do anything ever again. I'll just, whatever. Like that part was a big part of it. A lot of it was questioning. You're always asking questions like why it happened, and then you get into blame, right? It's like obviously somebody screwed up, or this is wrong, and how come the customers, or why is the government this way? Whatever it is. Like, and for me in that, like, there were a number of things, even with people on my team, like that stress really changes the way you view things, and so we really had to battle over certain things. The board level was really difficult, so we had one investor is just absolutely brutal. Another investor was, eventually was like, man, I would invest in you in anything that you do, which was like, what? And you learn, like, when the emotional side of that still comes to me, it gets to me, but you also have to deal with, like, not everybody's on your team. Everybody is incentivized in a different way, which I learned over time, and you get to figure out later on, like, looking back with some distance, like, oh, well, of course they weren't on my team. Like, what they had to do is earn money for the fund. Like, so why would they care about whether I had debt? Like, and so you bring those into the future. But the emotional side, it's a very lonely place. Anybody knows running a company is a really, even if you've got a big team, like, running a company is a really lonely place. So, and I think shame thrives in if you're by yourself, right? Sharing stuff really helps. So that was some of the stuff that you really have to deal with.
Chris, you have anything you want to?
Sorry, I was listening to him, so I forgot the question.
Yeah, the question was, what were some of the internal things you were having to navigate, narratives that you were feeding yourself in the midst of failure that were coming up?
So at the fly shop, good grief. So, like, I guess starting in kind of the 2000 era, like early 2000s, I had a skateboard shop that then I ended up starting a skateboard company, and then I ended up with an apparel brand, and I was doing a lot of freelance design work so that I could kind of play with the different companies. And so then with the fly shop, as I was dealing with that, it just felt like, cool, do I just have like a 3 to 5 year cycle of just failure and I want to stick to it. Why doesn't it want to keep on going? How can I what do I do to actually and realizing there are some things that are inevitable or out of my control beyond what I can do to the best of my ability. And so, yeah, I mean, being like, hey, babe, so, how I have a company, looks like in about 6 months, probably not. That just, it felt very difficult, just, shame of just all right, so I know you love me, and you've stuck with me through all this other chaos, but yeah, it's tough to do that, to be like, so it looks really cool, feels on the surface like it's going, and then to know that, there's that split where it's not.
Yeah, both of you are kind of talking about, it's not just something that happens to you, but it's something that you start feeling about yourself. People throw around the phrase, it's just business, but it's never just business. I can hear heart issues popping up in both of you of failure, I've got to talk to my wife about this, why doesn't it want me, I want to do this, to what's the investor think about me, who's on my team. And loneliness, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, having to tell someone, hey, we're not going to have a business in 6 months, or who's actually on my corner, can I ever do this again? Those are massive things. As people of faith, though, as you've navigated, and you guys have navigated this, and one of the reasons I wanted you all on the panel was I feel like you've navigated this in a way, again, not perfectly, but with grace. And as people of faith, what are things that you've held on to about who God is in the midst of failure? What were things that helped you in those times trust the Lord when it did feel like everything was falling apart? When you didn't know what the next step were. It's one thing we can look back and we're going to, as we keep talking about this, see how God did show up. But in the moment, what did failure, what did it look like? What did you cling to? What were you holding on to in those moments in light of your faith?
I mean, I don't know, you look for answers, why? And a lot of times that answer is not there. Sometimes it's obvious there's fraud or, the economy tanked or something, but that's one thing. But you're not going to get all the answers. So it ends up being, you learn over time, I think, this looking back, like, well, I mean, never know why that happened, but I know why. I think I know part of what God was doing to me through that. So I think learning that you don't have to have the answer, but you need to understand that you were called to something, and I've been called to things that succeeded too. But you get called to those in equal measure. Like this is something that you just can't resist, and you're going to go do something. And there's a reason that you're in it, but the reason is not necessarily what you think it is, and you may never understand why it ended up the way it was. So changing the perspective to one of like he's doing this for all things work together, for good. It doesn't say all things were good that got worked. And it also didn't say good is success. It's just good, like our good. So what does God want? And so that's really the question. What does he want from me? Like, what is he teaching me? And that's a hard, I think getting humbled drives you closer to that much more than success does. So sometimes some of us just need it more, I think.
Yeah, for me, I guess it's probably also the older I get, the more I realize, I think I said it to you, you watch your hero, your action movies of Saving Private Ryan, and they drop the gate at D-Day and they're all running out, and you're like, I'm the guy that's charging, and really, odds are there's a whole lot of guys not even making it out of the boat, just getting hit in the head, and it's done. Before it starts. And so realizing that I'm not always charging ahead. I'm not necessarily the hero in the story. We have a God that has a much bigger, I'm complete failure. I will be all the way through my life. But it kind of tends to be this weird juxtaposition, at least in my mind, of if you scale the earth down to a pool cue, or a cue ball, it's smoother than a cue ball. But that same little view of well, none of this actually matters. Also, you scale it back in and you think of community and stuff and the things that, we have a God that's so huge that, yeah, you feel like you don't matter, but then he zooms in so hard and so tight that you're oh yeah, actually the Himalayas in scale are massive when you're there. And so you get this community that your company might be affecting too. And so all of a sudden you see that there's major importance, just the same way that God, could very easily zoom out and be speck that, it's, what is it? I think it's a mile long of if you just took the alleged 4 billion years or however many billions, if you took that a mile, lifespan doesn't even equal a human hair of thickness. You're a little puffa, you won't be remembered really, legacy beyond, a couple generations maybe. And even then so it's I could very easily go, this isn't important, but what is? And it's God and the things that he has planned in his big story. But I get these micro interactions with the community that I get to go, okay, those are the important things. So how I have closed or how I've started can affect people a lot.
I'm really thankful y'all are sharing this. Oftentimes as believers, we look for the success stories to talk about faithfulness. And what you both are describing is, what does it mean to be faithful, that that I actually believe God's doing something even when it doesn't work out. I think in failure, do we have space for that? Because oftentimes we want to hold on to the narratives of God must have been in it when it's successful. And that's full stop. It's almost like our own version of prosperity gospel. This idea of no, what was God doing? It helped me understand my place in the universe. It helped me know what to trust the Lord, that he's actually forming me in the midst of hard things. it makes me think about like all the people I've talked to and I asked them to talk about the time the Lord grew them the most. No one ever tells me about the most successful moment of their life, right? The time that the Lord grew them was usually one of the harder moments. It's like going through the fire. And so this naming that, it got me both thinking. When I asked Jonathan to do this panel, it stuck with me. He said, why wouldn't I say yes? Everyone fails. Like, it's just a part of life. And as a believer, we should be able to say that. Like, so anyway, this is really important stuff to be talking about. But I want to zoom back in on the last comment you just said, Chris, around not just in the failure, but in the closing of something. And both of you have been in situations where you know, and we're designed this way, especially when you build something, you want to hold on to it. You want it to succeed. You want it to do well. But at some point, when failure is coming, you have to release and let it go. And I think that's its own form of trust. And I wonder if you guys could just speak to a time where something was failing you had that part of your trusting in God was actually letting it fail, was letting it get to that last leg and move on to the next thing, and maybe what you learned in that process, if you're able to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can jump into it. A good one was basically when I finally kind of caught wind. I'd been catching I think something's wrong, something's a little off with the fly shop. So, you know, about almost 4 years in, and I started going, all right, uncovering things, kind of felt like a detective going through things and being like, that doesn't match, and starting to dig. And very fortunately, I think God kind of just was like, you know what, you're going to figure this all out and start uncovering it and start actually get the big picture of what's happening. And then you've got a week long that I was on a pre-planned motorcycle fly fishing trip where I was the guide, that happened to randomly, and I wouldn't have known of it then, but was the start of my new company now. But it gave me time to kind of just process a lot of that. But it turned around into going, all right, well, I've got 6 months, I think, is the runway that I've got to try and close this company. As for me, it hit going, I've got all these employees. How do I help them out? How do I make sure that if my business partner hasn't been actually paying the bills, I get the money back in the hands of the people that are owed money? And kind of came up with a 6-month game plan. And I was able to kind of process a lot of that kind of on a big fly fishing motorcycle trip where I was just spending more time standing there, which I probably needed, just kind of staring at a wall and being like, okay, that stuff's not important. How do I take care of the people that are? And so then, kind of had to step into that and just kind of chip away at that stuff, and had a good manager that I came to him and we locked in the idea, and then basically worked on making sure that each person could peel off at a specific time.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I remember we talked about this, like you immediately went to, how do I care in the midst of closing this and my own feeling of failure, how do I care for those that I was called to steward? And we can talk more about that, but I love that.
Feel free to, I think at the end of it, the really neat part with the community that had been built is all the major fly brands actually ended up starting they put together a policy that's named after my business partner. But they also gave me, you can start your fly shop back up if you want. And so I was able to move all my stuff, all my fixtures that I had built out over the years out of the fly shop. And I had 20, Dad, you were there. It was like 20 people plus, and then more trucks and trailers than we actually had gear to go on them. And then the opposite happened where I showed up kind of handing my key to my former business partner at that point and saying, all right, I'm officially out now. It's officially done. It's gone. And I was like, so what are you doing with your few things that you haven't paid for but are keeping? and he had no one coming. He had way more stuff to deal with. And it was weird to find out he had 0 people, and instead of punching him out or something, that every single friend was like, we could do this. And I'm like, I ended up showing up the next day and helping him carry stuff out, and I did not want to do it. But it also was very much a like Frodo looking at Gollum, just being like, that's miserable. And he's clearly made himself a very unhappy person. And it was weird, for sure.
Man, letting go of something's really hard. You got blood, sweat, and tears in it. I mean, looking back at some of the I've got a couple examples of having to let go of other companies, which, by the way, is really good practice for being a fund manager. Like, you see it all the time. You're like, well, I don't know if this is, like, when is that point where you just go, let's get this talent somewhere else. You know, let's work on a different problem. But living it on the inside is tough. I've had, I guess, because some of these tough things happened early on, there's a lot of people that were the same way. Like, look, that want to work with me. Like, I don't have any problem finding talent to work on stuff because of a lot of the stuff that, like, I just cared about what happened as hard as it was. My wife says I probably cared too much about what other people got, but she doesn't really. She just says that. She's joking, but mostly. But there were a couple times that I had this amazing group, and we decided to work together, and it was like, man, this is a dream team. We're going to do some amazing things. And you fast forward a year or two, and you realize, man, everybody's not quite lined up, or, you know, there's some distractions. Everybody's doing different things. This is just not going to work. And that's really, especially when you think this is the perfect team to solve that problem. This is going to be massive, and it just doesn't work. Like that is really hard to let go, and painful to do. And that's happened a couple times with teams that I thought would work together really well. But it's hard to know when. Like, the time is, because you learn as an entrepreneur, and you're trained, like, never give up and persevere, and which is true going through the hard times, because it's a contact sport. You're going to get bruised and like, just part of building a business. So learning when getting bruised and getting knocked out is, you know, those are two different things. So, but timing's tough. Like, you know, letting go is tough.
Some wisdom on when to do that, and like let your pride go a little bit on that. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a definitive, like, rule of thumb, because it's so situational. But you can usually tell. A lot of it comes from determining whether somebody's hanging on to something too tight when it's starting to unravel. So it's not, if somebody's saying, hey, I really want this thing to work out so bad that I'm going to do whatever, I'm going to go to the mat, and we're going to, you know, I did this, you know, am I going to go bankrupt? It doesn't matter. I just want this thing to work. There's a line in there where, like, this needs to just shut down. If there's investors involved, they've probably calculated in some failure. Like, it actually matters more to you than to them, or feels closer to you than them. And so an investor will probably draw that line closer than you will if you're super, like, passionate. That's where passion can really hurt you. Identity, you get tied in. So I think there is a line where you can pretty much see it starting to slip off the edge. And
Well, we're talking a lot about how we think that failure isn't always, it can be a way that God grows us and strengthens us. And I'd love if you'd be willing to share how your faith in Christ has grown because of failure. What have you learned about who God is in newer and stronger ways because something didn't work out?
I mean, I guess personally, I probably think I put myself lower on on the totem pole. Again, kind of realizing I'm not the central character, more and more consistently. Being okay with failing has helped in, even just basic things of apologizing to your wife or your daughter and like, hey, sorry, I came in hot, and I didn't mean to. Or like just having a little bit more humility in just everyday interactions too. But yeah, that also puts a lot of things into perspective, or at least I guess I've learned more and more to look towards a much bigger picture and not be as concerned with a lot of the little day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, humility is probably the biggest thing. I love how you said that, putting your, getting things in the right perspective or location. And I think business too, putting a business into the right place, you're not worshiping the business. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of times you worship the business. Like this is, because it's so tied to me, you're kind of worshiping yourself because this is what I can do and my capabilities and I'm called, and look how, hubris is a real thing. It's probably the most, pride and hubris are probably the most damaging things you can do from a decision influence standpoint. So I think that humbleness, forced humbleness, ends up being one of the biggest benefits. I also think, one thing I really learned that took a while to unpack was, what God seems to care about is obviously us, drawing us to Him, and these things that we're called to, business or project or whatever it happens to be, they're really just tools in and of themselves. He calls you to either influence other people or solve a problem, but really to grow you in relationship to Him, right? And I think the interesting unpacking part for me was it's almost like using this as it's a craft. Like building a business is a craft. It's not like you're not talking about there are moral decisions you've got to make, right and wrong, but they're also just like, I get called to this because it's like a sport or art. Like you've got some natural pull to it. You're excited about what this is you're going to solve. But it doesn't mean you're perfect day one. You're going to make mistakes, and other people are going to make mistakes. So you've got to go through the reps. And so having an empathy for yourself, but also for other people around you, and other people that fail and succeed. It's like, well, most of the time you realize the stuff that I see that I'm comparing myself to, because I'm not giving, I'm trying to be like everybody else. I see their best, right? Movie scene, it's like, I don't see the 17 takes, I see the one take. The article that gets touted in Chattanooga, the best businesses or whatever, you just see one of the results. Businessman of the year, whatever it is, you see that. So the humbleness, I think, is because humbleness drives you to trust. It's outside, which and again, you either go to anxiety and try to trust things that are damaging to you, or you trust that God has a plan for you and can take you through this valley. And you have to go through the valley. It's not like He's going to rescue you from grief of letting something go. You got to go through it. So I just learning to trust and humility, I think, are probably the biggest things.
Yeah, I think, we kind of touted this Lunch and Learn series as trusting God is one of those catchphrases we throw around in Christian circles. I think another one we throw around is, well, find your identity in Christ. And we don't actually talk about what that means. And what y'all are describing is there's so many other things we find our identities in. Like, my business is not just something I do, it's who I am. Who am I if that thing fails? What does that say, not just about what I did, but about who I am as a person? And you're right, when we move towards humility, it actually moves us to center on Christ. Like it's that sense of, it's a movement of trust.
There's an interesting thing. The sermon on Sunday was, obviously God uses these moments to tune your radar on what things are actually, what's happening. And like it was in Mark 6, and everybody's heard a prophet is honored everywhere except for his hometown, his family, and his home, right? Or her own. But the very next verse, where that came out of was Jesus was in his hometown, like Nazareth, and was trying to do things. But everybody knew him. They knew him when he was little, and they're like, come on, prophet, son of God. Like, it was really hard for them to tie this stuff together. And the next verse says, Jesus was, it says unable. I have to go back to whatever the Greek or whatever, unable to perform miracles. All he could do was heal the sick, and which I would count as a miracle. But what he was getting at, what it's getting at is, like, he was talking about transformational miracles, like personal relationship miracles, and it was really interesting just to even think, like, even Jesus had, in his choice and even in his power, that he could do whatever he wants. Like, there are situations that are just not conducive to what we would call success. Like, how many people did you save? That was Jesus. Like, well, maybe that wasn't the point, but we get to learn from, somebody who is perfect. There are things that are that's not bad or sin. It's just, this is, would we call that failure? Or is that something that we could learn from? It was really, it kind of took me off guard, even reading that a little bit. So that's constantly.
That's good. Yeah, Hebrews 2, where Jesus became like us in every way, including when things don't always go perfectly, right? Not that he wasn't perfect, but the situations around him, about what it meant like for him to navigate that moment and cling to the Father. Well, we got a room full of this many people. More likely than not, there's someone that right now isn't just, failure is not just something from their past, or something that feels like failure isn't just something that they're thinking about for the future, but they're in the middle of it right now. What would y'all's advice be to folks as people of faith, as they navigate the things in their life right now that aren't going as the way they thought, that feel like something big in failure? What would be advice you'd give them right now?
I mean, one piece is don't live in that alone. Find. Like I started 2 different CEO roundtables for that reason, because failure is like a daily, weekly thing, and if you're only dealing with it by yourself, it just festers. So you realize other people fail, and even people's success. Like, I have one of my brother-in-laws, for a little stint in Nashville, he was putting highly successful business execs with very top of the stack gang leaders and sitting them down to have coffee, and they were both in the same spot. They're both like, yeah, we've got more money and anything that we need, we've got it. But if we stop, we lose, our job, our life, our wife, whatever it is. And so they felt like completely trapped. And so even somebody who's like feels like they're the strongest or most powerful or most successful, like they need to be talking to somebody. Now, I don't know what all came out of that, but there were some really interesting parallels in that. But don't do it alone. Don't live alone. I mean, I think we're called to be in community and in fellowship. So,
I think Chris.
I mean, I definitely repeat the community side of things. I had a lot of friends that I was, asking input on kind of throughout kind of the closing of the fly shop side of things, where I fortunately had a lot of people to be like, hey, this feels like the right thing to do. Am I off? And so that was super helpful. And then again, remembering that like the things that I'm doing are going to be affecting other people as well as myself. And so it's my employees, my wife, my family, stuff like that. But they're also the community that usually doesn't know until you tell them. So walking through it with them was super helpful.
That's really good.
And then, I mean, also there's some parts where it's like, if you're going through it, there's that assessment of like, is it failing and it can be saved, or it can't be saved? And so the community side on like the support side, where it's, all right, like, how do we end this well? Or, okay, I think there's a shot at fixing this, and then jumping into the work to solve it. And both of them have work to close out or to fix.
And obviously, in this kind of being in the Word's important. I think there's, like, there wouldn't be a Psalms in the Bible, I think, if there wasn't this kind of struggle. Yeah. Like, Psalms would be kind of irrelevant, right? So I definitely being in the Word.
That's good. Well, guys, thank you for being willing to share. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but can we give them a round of applause for sharing their stories? I want to make sure we get you all out on time. Can you guys hang around for a few minutes if people have questions? So if you can stick around and want to ask some questions, please, they're willing to do that. But thank you all for making time to be here. And we want to invite more of these conversations, that we believe God walks in these moments, not just in the good things, but in the hard things, in your business and in life. Ross, do you mind doing the next slide? We have a quick survey. We're going to throw a QR code up on the screen. If you have time, it would mean a lot to us as we at Faith Go Up want to put on events that actually are impactful for you all. We don't want to assume that what we do matters, and so we want to hear from you about how we could do it better and what your takeaways were from today. It's a 2-minute survey to fill out, so if you could take a few minutes and do that, that would be great. A couple things, we'll leave that up on the screen for a second, but a couple of things just coming up. This week on Thursday at our offices, we're actually hosting an info meeting about our Main and Market Fellows program. So if you're someone who is interested in maybe doing a deep dive in what the gospel says about your work and would be interested in doing that with other believers around the city, we'd love to be able to tell you more about that program. Raise your hand if you're a Main and Market Fellows alum in the room. We have 4 folks that have been through the program in the room right now. But next, on Thursday, we're going to have some alumni and some current people talk about the program and what it's meant to them. And if you want a free lunch and learn more, we'd love to do it. We'll put some info about that on the screen as well here in a second. And then also, we'll put it on the screen too in a second. On March 25th, we have our next Lunch and Learn event in our series on Trusting God, and it's Trusting God in Job Transition. So as you're in that time, what does it mean when God's calling you something new, and what does it mean to walk in faith into the new season? And so Lane Ford's in the room. He's going to be on that panel with Leslie Skeers from United Way and Tamika Brewer, who is a realtor here in town, and be sharing about their journeys of job transitions. So we'd love to have you be a part of that. But yeah, if you want to learn more about Main and Market, let me know. But thank you all so much for making time to be with us. We're honored to have you. Let me pray for us, and we'll let you all get out of here on time. Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you, God, that you promised to be with us. And that's not a promise for only when things are going well and we feel like we're succeeding, but Lord, even in the things that feel like failure in our lives. And we thank you, God, that you meet us there and that your love for us, our identity, is not wrapped up in whether the world sees success or not, but Lord, that you see us and love us because of Jesus, not because of us. And so we give you our lives, we give you the work you've called us to do, we give you our families, and God, may we be examples of your renewal in the world and in the places you call us to be. In your name we pray, amen. Thank you all so much for being here today. Come say hi to these guys.